Welcome to The Deep Dive, the show where we explore the hottest topics in HR, assessment, and the world of work. As we dive into the world of AI and HR, the general consensus seems to be that while most HR teams are wanting to use AI, very few feel confident actually implementing it. This episode will move us from why to how, a practical guide in building explainable AI processes across the entire talent lifecycle. To help us map this out today, we have the expert who puts the AI in HR, Martyn Redstone. Martyn is the founder of Eunomia HR and a regular advisor to HR teams on governance, skills, and implementation. He has decades of experience in the space and many useful resources, which we will link below. We feel extremely lucky to have him on the podcast today. Martyn, welcome. How are you?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm fantastic. Thank you.
Awesome. So, Martyn, you're the founder of Eunomia HR. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and your work in the space?
Sure. So Eunomia HR is the next stage in the evolution of what I've been doing for several years, which is helping HR leaders and recruitment leaders implement AI effectively and responsibly. And we're now taking that responsible very, very seriously. So Eunomia HR is the rebirth of the AI advisory service that I provide, now with a specific focus on ethical AI, good governance, and responsible implementation.
Martyn, can I ask you a little bit about how you actually got into this world?
Yeah, absolutely. So I won't bother taking up the entire podcast with my background, but I've been in this space for about 20 years now. And for the last 9 years, 9 years ago, I started working. I've been working with the kind of technology side of it for the last 15, 16 years of that 20 years. 9 years ago, got really heavily involved in the world of AI through chatbots. And I was really the first person in the market who was talking about the benefit of automation, chatbots, conversational AI. And that kind of carried on, really, until the explosion of generative AI happened with the launch of ChatGPT. And everyone was really looking for somebody who already understood it, already got it, and already really understood the technology. I'd been using language models in my work for a couple of years before ChatGPT. So really, I was in a prime position, ultimately, to do what I was already doing, but more so. And a lot of the work that I was already doing involved good governance and good foundations for responsible AI implementation. And so what I found, especially over the last couple of years, is that there's been some shortcuts taken in the way that people were implementing AI and using AI. So I decided that I wanted to be the responsible adult in the room and help the industry implement effectively, but implement responsibly.
Amazing. Makes so much sense. And we know that you also have some really useful resources for people, which we're going to link in the show notes as well. So don't forget
Thanks
to check those out. But I think a great place to start is to ask you where most HR leaders go wrong when trying to implement AI.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's been a couple of reports released last week. The first one was the report from Anthropic around how businesses are using Claude, their large language model based chatbot, and then we also had OpenAI release a report on how people are using ChatGPT. And what there is there's a huge divide between how people are using it compared to how businesses expect it to be used. And so I think the biggest mistake that's happening right now is organizations, and we had it in the advent of social media, and organizations not knowing how to handle people's use of social media in the workplace for workplace-based tasks. So LinkedIn in our industry, the big one. And, at first people were saying you can't use LinkedIn, or if you do use LinkedIn, it's our data and we own your account. Nobody really knew what was going on, but they couldn't bridge the gap between something that was particularly personal, but a workplace tool. And so I think that's what's going on right now in the world of HR is this really, really difficult challenge, which is HR leaders who don't know how to bridge the gap between utilizing AI at work, but a very personal tool like something like ChatGPT.
Yeah, I can imagine it would be really confusing for a lot of leaders who are hearing all of the buzz about it and want to make sure they're staying ahead of the curve and don't want to fall behind. But also, especially in large enterprises, comes a lot of risk. And regulation and I guess a thoughtfulness around how we implement these tools.
Yeah.
We actually released a report recently on AI and talent acquisition specifically, and we uncovered a stat where 93% of crows are intending to implement AI in some way. However, only 1% feel fully ready to do so.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to that point exactly. Does that resonate from a lot of the conversations you've been having recently?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's this kind of top-down pressure happening in most organizations where people are being put under pressure to implement AI, do more with less, all those kind of things. And I think that there's a massive gap in the data that crows have in order to implement AI. Not only the enablement piece around training, upskilling, and what have you, but also when you look at somebody's job description or the actual job that they do, because there's sometimes quite a lot of difference, and you work out, three things, what's automatable, what's augmentable, and what's purely human. And then you can start from there. And the same thing across not only the work that people do, but the services that departments, divisions actually deliver to their users, whether that's internal or external. So I think that there's a huge breakdown when it comes to the data that crows require in order to know where to start.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I suppose another question for them is who do they go to or where do they go in order to
Mm.
figure out where to start as well? When you hear the term AI by design in HR, does that fall into that, I guess, thinking around how do we fill these knowledge gaps and how do we actually implement AI thoughtfully?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that AI by design is quite a new phrase that people are talking about. And I don't think that that's a fair phrase to use. I'll be honest. I think
Hmm.
it's quite a confusing phrase for a lot of people because for me, the term infers starting again. And I don't think that's the case. For me, I'm a big fan of service design. And for me, AI is an enabler and a part of the service that you might deliver, but it's not the be all and end all. And I think that's ultimately where the pressure's coming from, is the crows are almost thinking, well, we have to kind of scrap everything and start again with an AI first design. And that's not always the case. I think organizations need to move away from trying to become AI first and
Hmm.
try and become just AI enabled.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting because I suppose it would be easy to get wrapped up in all of the hype as well. Like, what are some
Mm.
common questions that crows or TA and TD leaders are asking themselves right now that maybe don't need to hold as much weight as they should in the space?
I think the biggest question that I hear and I get asked is how do we implement AI agents?
Okay.
And it's just this term that's you mentioned about kind of the hype. You know, my counterparts across the pond in the US. Last week there was the massive HR tech conference out there, and some people told me it was more like the the AI
Mm.
agent conference because that's what everyone was talking about. And I think that again, HR leaders, crows, they're really getting themselves het up in the hype, and they kind of need to step back and say, okay, well, do we need AI? Do we need automation? Do we need a bit of both? Do we just simply need better processes, better internal communication, all those kind of things? And so the biggest question I get asked is usually something to do with FOMO. Ultimately, people feeling as though they're missing out on something because they see across, their peers, across LinkedIn, across all those kind of things, all these kind of fancy terms that are coming out and hype terms that are coming out that just make people feel more under pressure and feeling as though they might be missing out or missing the bus.
Do you think AI agents and chatbots are overhyped?
I love the fact that you put them both in the same sentence because most people call a chatbot an AI agent. And yeah, absolutely. You have to remember an AI agent by its very definition is something that has agency, which is something that doesn't need any human input, can get on, make decisions, decides what tools, what data to use, can go back up on itself, fix itself, etc., etc. And in our world, that's not happening. Most what people term AI agents are just chatbots or automation with a bit of lipstick on it, and ultimately because our our world of HR is very, human led, and some of the processes and decisions that we make significantly impact somebody's life. I don't think we're going to be seeing true AI agents in our space for a very long time, because by their very definition, they don't need any kind of human input.
And do you think there are processes that should never be automated?
I think that there has to be a very specific definition made around what kind of automation is going on for some of those processes. So what we tend to see is two different types of automation. We've got automated decision making and automated decision execution. I think that there's a lot of processes in our space that cannot have automated decision making. And that's why employment focused AI is in the high risk element of the EU AI Act, because when when AI is involved in making a decision that has a material impact on somebody's life, employment, it's one of the top three stresses in somebody's life next to moving home and having children. So why on earth would we want a machine to make an automated decision? Automated decision execution, absolutely. That's what we would call automation. Ultimately, we are asking a machine to do things based on how we would do it, and we're checking that off as humans and making sure that's working properly. So yeah, so I think to answer your question, there's a lot that we can do for automated decision execution, but decision making around anything that involves somebody's employment, whether that be hiring, firing, promotion, anything involved in that, we can't ask a machine to automate that fully.
So decision execution seems lower risk
Absolutely.
than decision making.
Yeah.
And how would a team know when they're ready? Is that something they would start with decision execution and work up from there into using bigger tools or implementing them more and more? Or how would a team know that they're ready to use AI within their processes?
When I'm working with my clients, we have a framework which is crawl, walk, and run. Ultimately, you can't run before you can walk, and you can't walk before you can crawl. So when we're looking at the entirety of the processes and understanding what is automatable, we're looking at the easy wins, the low hanging fruit, the low risk stuff. So things that don't involve any form of decision making, things like FAQ chatbots. So for from an HR perspective, HR teams are inundated with queries around what's the policy for this, what's the process for that, where do I find this, where do I find that. Hugely low risk automation can go on there, but actually highly valuable as well, because the amount of time that HR organizations take up in just answering those questions can be wiped out immediately. So highly valuable, but highly low risk. So that's the crawl piece. Once you're really starting to see the impact of that's embedded, you can then start moving yourself towards walking, which is something probably a little bit more high risk, something that's a little bit more wider, impactful across the team or across the organization, and it's just slowly, you don't have to do the whole big bang thing. Going back to your previous question around big mistakes, that's one of them. People try to go all in on big bang when it comes to implementing AI and automation, and it's the wrong way to do it. Find something low risk, find a really good use case, do that first, and just start building upon that.
So it sounds like doing an assessment of where those high value, low risk tasks sit might be a good way to work out the easy wins for AI implementation.
Absolutely. So there's a big chunk of work that has to be done right at the beginning, which is everything from time and motion studies to interviewing both, the team members, the users of that service, the management, etc., etc. And it's it can be not a long drawn out process, but it has to be done properly. And from there, you get the automation opportunities. You also get some fantastic pieces of work that can go towards board level evidence for getting investment and all those kind of things, but it has to be done properly. It can't be done on a whim. So you do have to do that piece of work first.
Yeah, okay, makes complete sense. And so you've done some work and research around the effectiveness of conversational AI and chatbots. Could you tell us a little bit about that work?
Yeah, so I was really concerned because there's a lot of new vendors coming out in our space, especially in the recruitment and talent acquisition space, where and also a lot of things being built internally, where people are thinking, great, now we've got access to these powerful AI models like GPT and Claude and Gemini and what have you. We can look at parts of our process that are really blocking, and we can automate them. We can fire in some powerful AI. One of the biggest challenges in the recruitment process nowadays is just the inundation of applications. So people are now looking and going, great, I've got a problem, I'm going to fix it. And they're asking, and they're building tools that are using large language models to do CV screening ultimately. And I've always had an issue with that because I think it's the wrong way of doing things. We're asking generative AI to do discriminative AI work, and the two just don't mix as far as I'm concerned. So rather than just getting on my soapbox and wanting to tell the world off about doing this, I thought, well, let's do some research. So over a course of a few weeks, I every day used 3 AI models. ChatGPT, Google, Gemini, and Grok from XAI, the same 109 CVs against the same job description with the same prompt across all 3. So that was 109 times 3 every day for 3 weeks, and the results coming out of there were really scary. Really scary. Some of the top level results were that the rank drift that was happening. So on average, if we were looking at just pulling out the top 10, that would change every day, and on average,
Wow.
each placement was changing by plus or minus 2.5 places. At the extreme, one CV that came in at number 1 disappeared out of the top 10 the next day. So that was the first kind of major worry, is that there was no repeatability, which again is just dreadful from a screening perspective. The second major one was that, and there's been some research coming out in the last couple of weeks that has really confirmed this as well, which is I found a very odd pattern, which was that the large language model would work through the CVs, and it would only it would stop once it had its top 10. So it wouldn't look at all 109. So on average, not even on average, across the board, 55% of CVs weren't even looked at. And there was another one, which is that the reasoning behind the decision was very boilerplate. And we know from a lot of other research that the way that large language models do their reasoning is actually post-event, because ultimately they are text generation models. So you ask it why it did something, and it will make up something based on your question that seems quite okay, but actually isn't the reason why I did it. So there's lots and lots of big red flags, and I would say that anybody that's using a large language model based process or product that is doing discriminative work, so screening CVs, assessing people, don't do it,
Yeah.
because that's not what it's designed for.
No, massive red
Yeah.
flags, and pretty much just wipes that out as a viable option
Absolutely.
at all.
Yeah.
Wow. And were there any insights from that you think are applicable from a talent development perspective as well?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think that any solution that you're either building or buying that involves assessing people,
Mm.
and as I said, that's doing discriminative work, you can't build that on the basis of a large language model. So if you're building that internally, you can't, you need to ask yourself questions. You need to do those things like, if I'm assessing somebody, whether that's for joining, leaving, or developing, do those tests. I'm throwing this data through. When I do it tomorrow, is it the same outcome, etc., etc., etc. Do those tests internally if you want to test it, and ask the question of your vendors as well. Are you using large language models? Have you done tests around rank drift, repeatability, stability, etc., etc.? Ask the important questions, and that's the bit that I try and do with the work that I'm doing at Unomi or HR, which is just getting people to understand they need to ask the right questions in order to protect themselves and the users of their systems.
Yeah, it sounds like that testing and experimentation piece is also really important as
Mm,
well, to make sure that you're not just using a tool for the sake of the hype or because of the FOMO that you mentioned,
Exactly.
but because you really know and can prove that it works.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And a common problem we see in relation to this with a lot of our enterprise clients is this tug of war between speed and implementation.
Mhm.
And I think that this is an issue that comes up for many different reasons, not just the implementation of AI, but where smaller firms can kind of be a lot more agile and maybe implement and discard really quickly, that's harder for bigger organizations. So from your perspective, how do you see bigger organizations being able to keep up without breaking the rules?
That's a great question. Anybody that knows me knows that I love an analogy. And anybody that knows me knows this analogy inside and out now, because it's something I repeat time and time again. It's called guardrails, and the whole point of guardrails, we think about it, on a motorway, a highway, right in the middle of the road, there's these metal rails that go along, and we call them guardrails. And they're not there to slow the traffic down. They're there to help people drive at speed safely. Because if they weren't there, and they normally are right next to the fast lane, if they weren't there, then people in the fast lane would be crawling along slowly, scared they're going to veer off into the oncoming traffic and cause a horrific crash. Now, the same applies to setting guardrails in an organization when it comes to the adoption of AI. Before you do anything else, decide on your guardrails, decide on your acceptable use policy, decide on your vendor strategy, decide on your privacy policies, decide on your transparency policies, etc., etc. Set those all first, because when you set those guardrails, people then know how to innovate and they can do it at speed. So the whole point of guardrails is not to get in the way of innovation; it's to allow people to know exactly what they can do, how they can do it, and get on with it and do it quicker.
Mm.
And that's, again, one of the biggest mistakes that I see, is guardrails being set retrospectively. And that ends up actually putting the kibosh on a lot of projects that people have just got on with because they didn't know the rules, they didn't know what they can and can't do. And when they start setting guardrails retrospectively, it pushes back innovation. So do it first, and allow people then to innovate at speed safely.
It's such a great analogy.
Yeah.
It really makes a lot of sense. Why do you think that companies are often setting these guardrails retrospectively?
Because, like I said right at the beginning, what we're seeing nowadays is a lot of people shortcutting. They follow along the hype. They've tinkered with ChatGPT. They now think that they're an expert. They might bring somebody in from external who hasn't really had much experience in delivering AI-based transformation projects or any form of technology-based transformation projects. And so, unfortunately, the basics are skipped or forgotten or not even thought about. And they dive straight in, wanting to make a huge impact really quickly. And that's what's happening. And that's why a lot of organizations now are talking to me about, unfortunately, having to retrospectively set those guardrails. But any organization that's already starting to think about it and not actioned it yet, get on with the guardrails.
Yeah, it seems like a great way to also get buy-in from
Absolutely.
other people to show that this is something that will be useful and safe to implement.
Exactly.
And do you think bigger organizations have any kind of built-in advantage that maybe a smaller firm might not have when it comes to AI or implementation?
I think so, if done properly.
Mhm.
So larger enterprise level organizations, they have a legal team, a procurement team, an IT team, et cetera, et cetera. But actually what I find is that Crows and HR in general, they have to be the bastions of AI transformation. They have to be the leaders of AI transformation, because every form of AI transformation touches people. And we see it in the news. We've got reduction in force due to AI. We've got, we're hiring a different type of person due to AI. We're changing job descriptions due to AI. These are all very much centered around people. So HR needs to take the leadership. But in taking the leadership, they need to bring all those people together in order to help set the direction, set the guardrails, and own the strategy.
And I'm excited to talk about how company structures are changing a little bit as a result of AI in a second. But I guess something a bit more fun first. If you could change any classic enterprise policy to help unblock the use of AI in a company, what would it be and why?
That's a really, really good question. I think that the well, AI isn't being blocked, I don't think, because of a classic policy. I think it's being blocked because of a lack of policy.
Mm,
So I'm just going to turn that on its head a little bit and
yeah.
go back to the whole guardrails thing, because when we see reports coming in, research coming in about why people aren't adopting AI, it's because mainly a concern around ethics, legal, etc., not technology, because technology is there. It's about the safety and the ethics behind it. So I actually think it's not a traditional policy that's stopping AI. It's a lack of new policy.
Yeah, it's an incredibly valid perspective, I think, when there is a lot of risk involved with implementing new things. It's
Mm,
really about finding the way to do it,
yeah,
to find the guardrails to implement, as opposed to what can we move out of the way to
exactly.
get going.
Yeah.
Oh, very interesting. And so if I'm a crow or a head of TA at the moment, what's one move this quarter that will change the pace for me?
I'm going to keep going back to it. If you haven't done it, get your guardrails in place, because you don't need to actually be working with AI in order to set the foundations.
Mm,
Acceptable use policies, transparency policies, procurement policies, policies aligned to legislation, aligned to ISO frameworks, aligned to NIST frameworks, making sure that you are setting yourself up for success in the next step, whether that be next year, next quarter, next half. Start now by just setting those policies. And like you said earlier, you do those and it creates a fantastic internal conversation as well.
mm. Okay. And if we could simplify that down to the number one guardrail, what's the number one guardrail that needs to be implemented?
An AI use policy.
Okay.
Yeah, start with that, and that will also bridge the gap between shadow AI and what's going on internally as well.
Okay, great. That's incredibly practical and useful. So, moving on to, I suppose, how structurally companies are changing as a result of AI and the implementation of AI. So,
Mhm.
Moderna, a pharmaceutical and biotech company, they merged their people and tech functions earlier this year. They created a new role of Chief People and Digital Technology Officer. What do you think of that? And do you think we're going to see more of this coming over time?
I think it's fantastic. Jensen, Nvidia CEO, founder, has been in the news recently because he's been over here in the UK, chucking a load of money at AI here. But last year, he famously said that IT is going to be the new HR.
Hmm.
And everyone sat back and went, oh, don't be so silly. But actually, we're seeing that now. And I go back to my previous point that what we're seeing now is that every AI focused transformation that's happening in a business has a human element to it as well. And so I think that seeing what's happening at Moderna, I absolutely think that's going to happen more and more when people understand that IT isn't systems in silo, it's systems that impact people.
Have you seen any other examples of that recently that come to mind?
Yeah, so we've seen, especially in the HR world, we've seen people and technology strategists coming on board in HR. We've seen Dropbox creating a role like that. We've seen Disney creating roles like that. So kind of big enterprise businesses, big global businesses are now starting to understand that in order to see a success in the future, we need to marry up people and technology. And I absolutely see that in the future. I think that the future role of TA isn't going to be talent acquisition. I think it's going to be resource acquisition and resource allocation. So I think that eventually, and we talked about it earlier in terms of the data need around jobs, what part of a job is human only, what's automatable and what's augmentable. I think that we're going to have a role in the future where we're going to look at a job and we're going to say, okay, well, we know that a job is a group of tasks that are done at different skill levels, at different competency levels. So we're going to work out what's best to do that task. Is it going to be a human or is it going to be a machine? So I think the future of HR and TA is going to be all around human and machine teaming. And so we're definitely going to see a lot more of that in the future.
It's quite an exciting time, really, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, understandably, a lot of fear for people as well. However, I think it's quite cool to see functions in a company merging that maybe we never would have
No,
anticipated.
no.
I think with Moderna, there was an example with this new digital technology officer or the new title, was working with the chief operations officer around which things did need to be automated and which was a human job, et cetera, et cetera. I
Yeah.
find that such an interesting conversation
Yeah.
that prior to probably wasn't happening as much, or not in the same way anyway.
No, and it's going to change the face of work. We know that we're going through an industrial revolution, and industrial revolutions always change the face of work. Whether that be going from a horse-drawn plough to a steam-drawn plough, whether that be people in a factory compared to robots in a factory. When we see an industrial revolution happening, we know it changes the face of work, and so that's what we're in right now. We're at the very, very early stages of it, and it takes almost a generational shift to change that world of work. So all I would say is ride the wave. It's happening. There's nothing that people can do to stop it. I know there's been kind of almost protest movements happening, anti-AI protest movements happening all over the world, and we'll probably see more of that. But it is happening, and we need to ride the wave. Otherwise we'd still be living in caves if we didn't allow innovation to happen. So my call out to people is understand what the future might hold for you, and work out what you need to do to reskill, to upskill, and get ready for a new future of work.
And so switching gears a little bit now, we hear a lot about AI transforming hiring in particular. And something we're quite curious about more and more is how this impacts, talent development. And I think your comments around resource allocation and taking someone that might be in one role already existing in the business to another, I think that speaks to that as well. And it's quite an interesting space that we'll see develop over time. What percentage of development processes do you think are or will be automated?
I think that there's a lot of the process that can be automated. We've already seen it, even a couple of years ago, BCG were saying that, their internal L&G bit at BCG University, their content creation, went from weeks to hours using AI. And I think that for me, that's going to be one of the key transformations around development, is going to be the rapid way that not only can you create development content, but also that you can serve up something very personalized towards what the person does or even what they want to do in the future. So I think personalized development is going to be the huge thing, especially as we move towards a world of work which is skills based. So I think that a lot of development will be automated. And I'll go back to my previous point, which is that when it starts stepping into the realm of decision making on somebody's employment, that's when you need to kind of step back a bit. But anything that involves giving people further and more opportunity to develop themselves as individuals, absolutely.
Okay. And bringing that into context, if you were, say, the chief people and digital technology officer at Moderna right now, what would be some of the first few questions you would be asking when it comes to the implementation of AI in their development programs?
I would be going back to the data around what people do for work, what people do in their jobs, what skills they need for those. And again, what part of that is augmentable, and then helping people work better with machines in order to augment themselves better.
Okay, great. That's really interesting. A huge consideration for our clients, and I know for a lot of the people you have conversations with as well, is the accountability and explainability piece around decisions or the implementation of AI when making any kind of decision or executing anything as well. What is the minimum that HR leaders need in the audit trail so that they can justify and defend decisions?
Yeah, so first of all, they need to show that they've been auditing for things like bias and what have you on a regular basis. That's the first piece of data they need. That gives you a little bit of transparency, a little bit of explainability. However, for me, it comes down to a simple rule. Can you explain why this machine made that decision in a natural language way that somebody with no technology background could understand? It's as simple as that for me. That is the core concept of transparency and explainability.
And what powers do you think humans will keep in this area? Like, why are they still absolutely necessary to these processes?
When I'm working with people on how they augment what they do or how they work with AI systems, one of the things that I try and impart is that, and it came out of the research that we spoke to earlier, is that when you're looking at large language model based chatbots like ChatGPT and what have you, they are highly intelligent interns that do not know how to do anything. That's how you kind of have to think about it. So I always talk to people and say, look, when let's say you've got an intern there, you wouldn't just say, go away and do this and expect the best. You'd first of all, delegate that task to them properly, tell them exactly what you want, how you want it, give them some examples of work done in the past, etc., etc. But the key part from that is when they bring it back to you and say, here's the work that I've done. It's the human skill of evaluating that work, using your experience, your knowledge, and your expertise to evaluate that work and then coach them through how to do it better. And that is a particularly human skill that we're going to have and we're going to continue having alongside things like learning velocity and what have you, so you can actually keep up with the pace of change. But I think that humans are absolutely still going to be involved, especially in our world when it comes to people, to question, to evaluate, and to point in the right direction.
That really simplifies it. To summarize, it sounds like you could say the human is speaking to the why in every decision.
Exactly.
And I suppose we add that layer of explainability. We need to be able to explain almost better or beyond the AI as to why this decision was made.
Exactly. Yeah.
What's one question that TA leaders, and I know you've spoken about this on other podcasts as well, which it would be interesting to hear your perspective on. So what's one question that TA leaders have to ask of any vendor when looking to use one?
I mean, there's a multitude of questions ultimately, but it starts with explainability and transparency. Especially if you're bringing on board a tool that helps you make a decision on who's going to be hired and who isn't. We have to start there. Can you tell me in a natural language way exactly how your system makes a decision? And then we go on to the repeatability. Do you see rank drifting? All those kind of things. But ultimately, there are a load of questions you have to ask. I've got a fantastic free resource around that that people can access. But those are the two most important ones right now, because ultimately, as we see regulation coming online here, EU, US, etc., we're going to see a ramp up of litigation happening, and we're already seeing it in the US. So explainability around how a decision is made, the lack of bias, etc., needs to be asked first and foremost.
Yeah, amazing. We'll put that resource in the show notes for everyone to refer to as well. If an auditor walks into a company tomorrow, what sort of thing is going to be a red flag to them? What are things that they're going to be questioning straight away, do you think?
So it depends what they're looking at, but ultimately, in things that we've covered already on the conversation, they're going to be looking at whether bias auditing has been done. They're going to be looking at explainability. They're going to be looking at things like human kill switches around decision making. So it depends on the regulation, the jurisdiction, the use case, but they are going to be looking that to make sure that the organizations haven't just blindly implemented AI without doing it responsibly and ethically.
Yeah, this is quite interesting. So you were recently on an episode of Matt Alder's podcast, who we've also had on the podcast before, and another incredible thought leader like yourself. So you mentioned on that podcast episode that generative AI can create a false confidence and maybe enabling shortcuts as well, which is something you've also spoken to in this episode. This is where concerns around compliance and governance tend to be most valid. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So what happened with the advent of ChatGPT was a very powerful AI model, a large language model, had a chatbot put on front of it. And people started using this chatbot and getting magic out of it. And it immediately created a false confidence. I had people saying to me, I know how to program AI. And I'm sitting there going, you know how to program AI? Are you a Python coder? Yeah, how do you do that? No, I talk to ChatGPT and I'm like, well, that's not programming AI. And it gives you this kind of, people have been getting this false confidence in their abilities and their understanding. And unfortunately, I kind of used a term, didn't use it on Matt's podcast, but I again, another analogy, when thousands of years ago when we were sat in our tribes and they had shamans and witch doctors and they were able to make, fantastic smoking illusions, and they'd tell somebody that it was a deity, that it was a god. And the people who were less understanding of the world of chemicals and what have you believed it. and thought it was God, and they believed the magic. And it's the same in Vegas with the shows and everything. So ultimately, it's created an illusion of competency, where people now get great answers out of AI. They don't second guess them. They don't understand that large language models are text generation, and so they do hallucinate, they do make things up, and so it's created this kind of false confidence in people, that they know AI and they get AI, and I hear it all the time, and I just think people just need to temper that a little bit and understand that all they're dealing with is a chatbot on the front of one AI model. And AI isn't a large language model. AI isn't ChatGPT. That's one AI model within a sea of millions.
It's quite an interesting space in that sense where it almost feels quite polarizing, where some people are so fearful and put
Mm,
off it just at the thought of having to potentially implement AI, and other people grasp that but then take it to the point where they're now a programmer and an
yeah.
expert in it. It doesn't seem like there are many people who feel sort of in the middle. I'm sure there are, but there are so many people that are either, really worried by it or completely excited by it
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, I see that a lot. If I'm doing a workshop, at the start of a process, I'll always take a polling of the room. Where do you think you are from basic to intermediate to expert? And you don't tend to get many people saying that they're intermediate. So I totally and utterly agree with your statement. The people who are expert by the end of a couple of workshops usually say, "Well, I probably think I'm a little bit lower than that now."
Really?
Oh,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But it's all to do with that kind of false confidence piece. So I think so. Yeah, and you've got people that say, "I've tried it, didn't like it," comes out with generic answers, those kind of things. But again, one of the things that I keep pushing back on people is that when you talk about AI, you're not talking about AI, you're talking about a large language model, generative AI.
Mm.
And so people who now call themselves, AI experts, they might be very, very good at prompting a large language model, but that's it. I wouldn't really call them an AI expert.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost one of those things as well where the more you know, the less you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So hopefully we can create some common themes and simple
That'd
ways
be
to
great.
get started. Another thing that there's a lot of noise around is these AI laws.
Mhm.
So help us cut through the noise here. What actually is landing in the next 12 to 24 months that our listeners need to be aware of?
So less than 12 months' time, so next August the 2nd, the high-risk part of the EU AI Act goes live. And what that means is anything to do with life-changing decision-making, so employment, healthcare, et cetera, has to now be compliant to those laws. And we've covered quite a lot of it, explainability, transparency, bias audits, making sure that you've got the right documentation, Annex 4 documentation. So to cut through the noise, you've got less than 12 months, unless you're listening to this in 12 months' time, then you haven't got any time at all. But August the 2nd, 2026 is when you need to be ready to go, because there are going to be people waiting to jump up and down from a litigation perspective. So that's in Europe. And what that means, and it's something to remember because I have this conversation with especially some of my peers in the US, is that it doesn't mean that if you're based in Europe, it applies to you. It means that if your AI is in the European market, it applies to you. It is a market access based, supply chain based piece of legislation. So if you are putting AI into the market, if you're supplying it to people in the market, if you're putting it out for public to use in the market in the Europe, it's very similar to GDPR. You need to be compliant. So that's here. UK, next 24 months, we'll just start seeing a movement of some kind of AI legislation coming through Parliament here. We've already seen, the start of that going through the House of Lords, and Lord Holmes putting out a piece of work on that. So I expect to see more around that over here in the UK. In the US, probably more state-based law coming out. We're seeing that a lot more now, and probably another change of mind around federal law as well. We see that quite a lot. So it's a bit messy over there in the US, and again, across kind of other jurisdictions as well. We're seeing a lot more movement in South America, a lot more movement in Asia and the Middle East, around upcoming legislation. So I think next 12, 24 months is going to be a really exciting time in the world of legislation. stressful but exciting because there's not going to be a standardization.
Yeah, time to get those guardrails ready.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And it seems, that the UK hasn't gone, to some of your points, quite as far as an act yet. Instead, we've got the ICO guidance and principles-based approach. So would you recommend, even if we might not have products in market in the EU, that we sort of look to that as a gold standard for now?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that whilst a lot of people think it's quite draconian, and it is, I'm personally quite opposed to the Act because I think it's overly legislative. However, it's there for a reason. And even with my kind of basic research that I've done shows that it's not trustworthy using certain AI models to make life-changing decisions. And so it has a purpose. And absolutely, I think that it is the best practice gold standard that you can aim towards. And if you cover yourself from the EU AI Act, you'll basically be covered everywhere else in the world.
Okay, cool. That sets some really useful places to start. And so do you expect that the UK will follow suit and introduce something stronger than just this guidance?
I don't know. Pre last year's general election, the previous government were very pro innovation, and they were very much, when they were looking at bringing in some AI based legislation, it was very pro innovation. With the current government, I don't know. I think what we'll see is something leaning more towards heavier regulation. I'm hoping that with the recent visit from tech CEOs from the US putting in a lot of investment into the UK, I'm hoping that it alleviates any future over regulation of AI. But it's still very open. I'm hoping that it kind of sits somewhere in between Europe and the US from a legislation to a innovation perspective.
Okay, excellent. Makes complete sense. Thank you so much, Martyn, for your thoughts on everything there. That's really given us
My
some
pleasure.
solid places to begin. Before we finish today, though, we've introduced a new quickfire round to the deep dive.
Yeah.
And we'd love to wrap up with some key takeaways for our lovely listeners.
Sure.
Is that okay with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's get into it. What's the biggest myth about AI and HR?
Is that AI and HR shouldn't happen because people like dealing with people. I think that's the biggest myth. People don't. People like dealing with things that provide them with immediacy, convenience, and agency, which is a machine.
Organizations ready for what's coming in the next decade or so?
No, and I'll hark back to what I said. There's a lot of work that we need to do around collecting data, understanding the world of work, understanding how to break down jobs into tasks. What tasks can be done by a human, what tasks can be done by a machine, and what tasks can be done by a human and machine team. And I think until we get that ready, that data ready, then no, we're not ready.
Yeah, and adding on to that, from your perspective, it sounds like, especially for larger enterprises, a way to sit ahead of the curve at this point is actually to start implementing those guardrails, because no one else seems to be doing that from your perspective. And if they are, it's retrospectively.
Exactly. And that's the first point of readiness from an organisation. But I think to answer your question, we're nowhere near ready for what's coming in the next decade. No.
Okay, very interesting. What % of HR processes should be automated, and why or why not?
Percentage is a difficult one. I think anywhere between 40 to 80%, depending on the organisation. But I think anything that involves repeatable, mundane, robotic processes, service desk automation, transfer automation, holiday request automation, all those kind of things. I think the world is your oyster when it comes to automating in HR, but doing it responsibly and ethically.
Makes total sense. What's one process you'd never automate?
I think going back to what I said, I wouldn't automate the final decision making in a process that involves deciding on somebody's employment.
Are there any others that you would never automate?
I think that there's certain instances where you might have something automated, but you should hand off to a human pretty quickly. So, in the drastic situation where, somebody is contacting an organization to let them know that a relative of theirs who's an employee of the organization has had a terrible accident, potentially has died. I think that if you've got an automation around notification, you probably need to have a safeguard in place that goes over to a human pretty quickly when it comes to that kind of thing.
And complete the sentence for me. Chatbots fail when?
not designed properly.
Number 6 is what percentage of companies would be in breach of compliance regulation if the rules came into force in the EU and US tomorrow?
I have the vast majority of them. I mean, I dread to think, but I don't. I think we're talking in the 90s percentage. Absolutely.
Wow,
Yeah.
really? It's so interesting, isn't it? Because so many people, it seems like people are suffering with that analysis paralysis thing as
Absolutely.
well, needing
Yeah.
to implement but not knowing how, and so not doing anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
The last one, what's one feature you'd add to every ATS if time and budget wasn't an issue?
I think the one feature I would add to ATS is candidate self-serve. I always hark back to e-commerce principles when it comes to thinking about the candidate experience. And one of the great things that I love about buying, online is that at any point I know where my order is. I know whether it's still in the warehouse. I know when it's being delivered to me. I get fantastic updates by text message. I don't see why we can't do that.
Yeah, I love that idea.
Yeah.
It's really, really interesting. Well, thank you so much for your insight and your time today, Martyn.
My
It has
pleasure.
been so great to have you here. Our listeners are very lucky. We feel very lucky to have your insights.
Thank you.
We'll leave all of your details down below. But for the listeners right now, where can they find you if they want to hear more?
LinkedIn's always the best place to find me. Martyn with a Y, Martyn Redstone. If you can't find me there, then I've disappeared off the face of the earth ultimately. So come and follow me. Come and connect with me on LinkedIn.
If you found today's conversation valuable, you can find related articles in the show notes below or previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Like, follow, and subscribe, and we'll be back soon with more great industry insight on The Deep Dive.